everybody, and welcome to the Remembering Akron podcast. I'm your host, Derek Maxfield, and today my guest is Dennis Freeman, or should I say the honorary Dennis Freeman?
Honorable, not honorary. Honoraries when you're passed away.
Thank you.
I think.
The honorable.
Well, I don't know about honorable.
Well, thank you for joining us anyway. Yeah. I really appreciate it. So we got a lot to talk about. Let's start with where you're from and when you were born. So you were born in Depew?
Depew, New York, 25 Lincoln Street.
So you were born at home?
I don't know if I was born at home or a hospital. Never did find that out before my parents passed away.
Okay. Did you have any siblings?
I had two. Ida Freeman and my brother Donald, who's still alive, and he lives in Alden.
Were you the youngest or oldest?
Youngest. My brother and I, or my mom always say, were mistakes because we were like 16 years younger than my sister.
Oh.
Yeah. So my sister, there was another, I think a girl was born, and she died just shortly after childbirth. She'd have been the oldest, and then my sister was born. And then my brother and myself came many years later. In fact, I was so young and my brother was so young during World War II, she used to push us around the baby buggy, and she liked girls more than boys, so she made my mother let my hair grow. It was blonde. So I looked like a girl. So she'd be pushing the wheel, the baby buggy down the street, and somebody said, oh, what a beautiful little girl.
Well, tell me about your parents, Donald and Gertrude.
Okay, Don was born here in Akron in 1900. He was born up on Main Street, where Babaloo's is, or the hot dog stand is in the corner.
All right.
Of Main and...
Very close by.
Yeah. He was born there. Sam, his brother, was 2 years older, was born over on the old homestead that was on Transit Road in Swarmsville. The Historical Society in Clarence has a map of the Civil War period, and they got that says Freeman's Farm on it. And I think that's
nice.
late 50s or early 60s. So Sam was born there. Shortly after, they moved to the house there that's long gone. And...
Tell me about your father. What did he do for a living?
He had a various amount of jobs. World War I broke out. Sam Freeman, my uncle, he joined the military. He was in the infantry, and then later on he got in a cannon brigade or something. And my dad joined. He was 17, but he didn't have his parents. They died pretty close to when he was a young kid. So he forged his mother's signature on the papers. Got in. They found out he was 16 at the time or something. They kicked him out, and then he got upset, and he went to the Adirondacks, became a lumberjack.
Really?
Yeah. Sam got out of the military in 1918 or 1919. He married a woman in Clarence. Her name was Louise Berghorn. And the old farm is where Kelly Schultz's place is. That was their farm, Louise, the Berghorn family farm. So they got married and they moved in there. My dad came back for the wedding from the Adirondacks and somehow met my mother, and she lived in Buffalo at the time. And then how they got together, I have no idea. But then they got married and moved to Depew at 25 Lincoln Street, where I was born and my brother was born. I don't know where my sister was born there, too. I don't know. My sister's been gone quite a while already.
Mm-hmm. Do you know anything about your mother's family?
No, my mother's family was Oscar Heinz, Oskar. He was in the German army in 1889 under Kaiser Wilhelm.
Wow.
I've seen pictures of him in his graduating class as an officer in the artillery. And Kaiser Wilhelm was in the front of the class sitting in a chair.
Really?
But when he passed away in 1957, I was overseas, and my mom got a hold of me in a letter and said that Grandpa had passed away, and they found him downstairs. The only thing I have from him is got his, they call it a pickle hop, that German helmet with a spike on him.
Mm-hmm.
I have that. I have his sword. But...
well, those are nice artifacts to have.
Yeah, but that picture with him and Wilhelm in his graduating class, I don't know where that went.
Huh.
Now, my mother's sister, they lived not too far from where my grandfather lived. And before my mother knew about it, they had already been to the house, and I don't know, stuff disappeared. Because Mom went there later. She lived in Depew. My dad drove her out there, and they used to live on Euclid Avenue, just the other side of Harlem Road on Walden. And a lot of stuff that he had that was memorabilia was gone. And the only thing I have are his helmet, his sword, an old double-barrel shotgun, which I have a picture of him with that shotgun, and a watch, a pocket watch that he had, that when he fell down and had a heart attack, it broken, so it was worthless. So I had it repaired by a friend of mine, so I still have that.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow. So during your lifetime, World War II kind of fell in the middle before you graduated high school. Was anybody in your family affected by World War II?
My dad worked at Ford Motor Company as a supervisor at the old assembly plant down on Fernham Boulevard. When the World War broke out, he had the Ford Motor Company allowed him to go to Curtis on Genesee Street, Curtis Wright where they made the aircraft. I think P-40s are what they made there.
Okay.
My sister became Rosie the Riveter.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she worked there too during the war. A guy came back from World War II on leave. She met him. His name was Al Wojciechowski. They got married. She quit school and they got married. And I think they only had one child. But my dad worked at Curtis during the war, and at the end of the war, he went back to Ford on Fernham Boulevard.
All right.
And
how did folks in your family like Franklin Roosevelt?
I don't know. Politically, naturally, I was pretty young during the war, so I didn't hear much about Franklin Roosevelt or any of those people. My mom was a Democrat. My dad was a Republican. So they didn't talk politics because they didn't agree on it.
I see.
So I kept my nose out of it. The only way I got involved with politics is probably during high school. I'm a historical person. I like digging into stuff. And I collect military objects and items, swords and bayonets and old guns and all that. So I got to know some of the historical stuff. Then I start developing some ideas and opinions on politics, which were opposite of my mother's. She was more of a liberal.
I see.
So we'd get in arguments at the breakfast, supper table, or whatever, and my dad would have a fit. He'd like, quiet, don't say nothing, eat, and get up and, go back and sit down somewhere. So Mom and I would argue about politics. And at that time, it was like Eisenhower and stuff, so.
All right. So you went to Depew High School. You graduated there in 1956.
Right.
That was an interesting time, too. And did you go immediately to college?
No, several of us, I was going to go to college, and I figured, I don't know. I look at two things. If I don't go to college, I'm going to get drafted. The Korean War was pretty well winding down, and they were talking about armistice and everything, ceasefire. So I figured I'll be drafted for some reason or other because I'm pretty healthy. I shouldn't fail the, all the stuff you got to do before you're accepted. So myself and about four of the guys from school decided we were going to go in the military, either Navy, Air Force, or something. So we all went down. We signed up, and my mom had to sign the papers to allow me to go in because I was 17. And we went down to the train to get inducted and everything else and sworn in, and I was the only one that went. The other guys backed out. So I says, well, I'm this far, might as well go. So I went in the Air Force. And I spent 4 years. And I went to San Antonio for my basic. And then I went to Air Force Base in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and then from there.
What did you think of those two places, Texas and Colorado? Those are very different places.
Yeah, Texas was, this is in August, September, hot. I mean, absolute. We had guys passing out from the heat, marching and parading and doing all that stuff. And the military service at that time for the Air Force, you got to remember the Air Force only became a separate branch of the military in 1948. So when I got in, we were issued winter clothes were blues, light blue and dark blue. But our summer uniforms were still khakis. We were still wearing leftover World War II and Korean War khaki uniforms. And then my fatigue uniforms were Marine fatigues. They probably looked and said, these guys in the Air Force, the only thing they do is fix engines and stuff. So we'll give them whatever we got left over. And I get pictures, it looks, when you show it to Air Force guys today, they look and say, you wore that kind of uniform? Yeah, it was all khakis. So,
Did you like Colorado?
when I got to Air Force Base, Colorado, the unit is downtown. It's 6 floors underground, 2 floors above ground. Air Defense Command. There was 400 people on that installation. Most of them are officers. Out of the 400, probably 300 were officers, and the rest were enlisted men to cut the grass, paint the walls, whatever, do support, drive people around. And you could look out the window and see, what's that big fancy mountain in Colorado?
The Rockies?
No, not the Rockies. They skied there in the summertime because it was so high. I can't remember the name. But you could look at that and see it out the window of the barracks I was in. And at that time I had a 46 Harley. So my mom shipped it out to Colorado Springs. And I was bound and determined I was going to drive that motorcycle to the top of the peak of that. Mount Everest? No, not Mount Everest.
Everest is...
Camp Number.
Yep.
So anyhow, I did take the bike, drove as far as I could. Now this is like in probably April or May, but half of the mountain was still had snow. You could see it. And I got about halfway up and the road was closed because it was still too much snow and stuff. So I figured fishing, trout fishing, hunting for all kinds of big animals, fantastic. I love this because I like to fish and hunt. So I got out there and I says, gorgeous, this is where I want to be. And my roommate says, Dennis, you're here for your 4 years. You're never going to go anywhere. You're going to stay here. So I got there just in time. I said, boy, this is beautiful. I love it. And somebody must have found out I liked it there. And they cut me orders to go to Japan.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 1957. And when I got to Japan, and I drove my motorcycle back from Colorado Springs, Colorado, all the way home. Took me 5 days. Terrible weather. Got back up around Ashtabula High and hit rain, snow, sleet. So when I got home, parked the motorcycle, and then I got overseas. They put me in Tachikawa Air Force Base. And I found out that was a center where you came in and they did all the paperwork to send you to other places in Japan. And my luck was 9th Air Postal Group in Kinpo Air Force Base, Korea. And that was the Air Force Base that was all the military people went to go into Korea. So that's the only base that we used at that time. So I spent a year in a tent. We had a big, you ever seen those brown military tents they use? And you see them in MASH and stuff.
The A tents?
That's exactly what we lived in. Same thing. You had wooden floor, you had a wooden door, and we took another tent down from another place and put it over ours to give us a little bit more, keep from raining and all that. And that's where I lived for a year, through the snow, through the cold, through the rain, through the heat, through the monsoons.
My goodness.
Yeah.
So what did you think of Korea?
When I got there, I went to Seoul, and it was probably 20, 30 miles north of where I was. And when we got there, you could stand on a tank and look over the whole city, and they're just rebuilding it. But I mean, the whole city was just about level. And there was buildings up, they were building and stuff. And the Han River bridges, they had 2 bridges like Grand Island. They had one coming and going. The one was still in the water yet. They had just finished opening the first bridge for local traffic and stuff. And they had a big celebration, and planes were flying by and all that kind of stuff. And I can remember P-51, we still used P-51 aircraft propeller-driven aircraft at that time. And the F-86 and F-100 Saberjet were being introduced, and the F-86 Superjet, that was being replaced. It was replacing the F-86, the early model that they used during the Korean War that the MiGs and all that flew against. So we had C-119s, C-124s, C-47s, C-46s, still a lot of propeller planes when I went in early. And it wasn't until I got sent home that I got my first turbojet ride on a C-130. That was quite a bit different than the older planes. I mean, it moved.
Yeah. So you didn't see any combat while you were abroad, but boy, that area of the world was a hotbed for military activity, whether it be the Korean conflict or a little bit later with the Vietnam War.
I get a picture of 3 planes. You couldn't get near them. They had guards and German shepherds guarding them. They were way out on the flight line. And they were twin-tailed aircraft. My son said he knows what they were. They looked like a B-25. Would a B-25? I think it had twin tails on the back. But they were using them for reconnaissance. And we had 3 of them when I got there, and I get a picture with 3 planes. When I left, there was 1. 2 had been shot down. And we had people stepping on landmines that hadn't been cleared yet, and they'd have a big wire, and they'd have a skull and a crossbones there, and they'd say, "Danger mines." And if you didn't watch what you're doing, and we still got guys shot, somehow, but they kept that quiet. So I know that none of the people that I knew got shot, but there was still stuff going on. And I had a guard. We pulled guard duty on the POL, petroleum oil and lubricant area, and motor pool and stuff like that. So the Air Force guys still had you're almost like being in the Army at that time. I mean, it was almost like being in the Army. It was very little. And my job was to unload and load the aircraft coming in with mail from overseas, from America, United States, flown to Japan, then I bring it over, and we sorted the mail, and we sent it to different bases. And then sometimes you had to fly to go to that base because it was a little remote and it'd take too long to mail to get there. So we used Charlie 119s and the C-47s to do that. So, but it was interesting, but damn cold in the wintertime. We used to have potbelly stove, and we use jet fuel to heat the potbelly stove. So you had a 55-gallon drum outside with a rubber hose coming into the building, coming into the tent, and then you had your reservoir in the back of this stove, and you let a little in there, and you take matches and paper and throw it in there to start that thing going. And then once it got burning, you had to control it, because if you got not enough heat, not enough fire, it created soot, and then all of a sudden the fire would go out, or the smokestack, the chimney would load up with all kinds of carbon and stuff. So we always carried a 5-gallon can inside the barracks that kept warm, and when it got so cold outside, the fuel would get jellied and it wouldn't flow. And you knew that because all of a sudden you start getting cold. But the oil that you had in the 5-gallon can was warm enough. You'd take that and hook it up, and and then we'd have a shower once a week. There was Papasan that would heat the water up above big tank, like a 500-gallon water tank. And then once a week, he would heat that up. You'd have hot water to take showers. Other than that, you had a pan in your barracks and a water bucket. And that's what you cleaned yourself with and washed and shaved and everything else with. So it was almost like MASH. When you watch MASH and how you see the stuff in there, it was almost identical to that.
Wow. What did you think of the people, the Korean people?
I felt bad for the Korean civilians because they were caught up in this thing. They didn't want anything to do with it, I'm sure. And they were poor. They lived, a family of 10 would be in a room this size. What's this, 10 by 10? A family of 10 people would live in that size one room. And it was rice paper thatched doors, very little for insulation, thatched roofs, metal roofs of GI leftover 55-gallon drums. They cut and flatten out and use them for roofing. and no sewage. They had like a drum on the ground and a little room and go in and potty and that. We used to have, in the summer, the Koreans would take that and use it for fertilizer for their rice field. And it stunk when they were using that human waste for fertilizer. And then they ate kimchi, which is sort of like a cabbage type of thing, but it had a terrible odor when it was boiled. So we'd drive buses to go from our base to Seoul, Korea if there wasn't any transportation, and we'd call them kimchi specials. And they were converted 2.5 trucks to buses. And the people over there didn't throw anything away. You'd have a pop can or a beer can. You'd look at a toy, homemade toy, and if you looked inside any cracks, you'd see Coca-Cola or some other, or beer labeled in the inside. So they'd take the can, open up, turn it inside out, and use the outside and paint it, make toys for the kids. And all.
Really?
Yeah, it was amazing, the ingenuity that those people had. And I remember once I was going north on what they call the MSR, main service route, to go to Seoul, Korea. And I was hitchhiking. And I got to some bridge. The roads were still dirt roads. You could find 50 caliber bullets stuck in them all over the place. And I came to this area. There was a bridge going over a dam. And his papa-san came walking up to me, and he pulled out a .45. And I figured, oh, cripe, I bought the farm.
Boy.
Well, he come over and he said, hey, GI, you want to buy? And I think, oh, geez, he just wants to sell it to me, a GI 45. But I almost crapped my pants. I figured, oh, cripe, I don't have a gun, don't have anything, and here's this guy got to come over with a gun and going to shoot my ass. So that was one thing. And my son says, when you buy it? I said, and I was scared stiff. You know, I was just glad that he just wanted to sell it, not shoot me with it. So
Right.
So that was a close call that I had.
That is a little bit scary.
Yeah, you know, being 18 years old, you know, yeah, that was.
Right. So when did you get sent home?
I got home in September of '58 and went to Eglin Air Force Base. I got home. I sold the Harley Davidson, 46 WL. It was leftover World War II bike. They still made them after the war. So I sold that, and a guy named Larry Bruce used to own a motorcycle shop where the animal places up on the Animal Doctor on Route 5.
All right.
That's where Larry Bruce's motorcycle shop was. And he had Triumph, Zundap, BMW, Horax, all these foreign bikes. Didn't have Harley or Indian. And he was going out of business. And he says, Dennis, he says, you got this old Harley you sold. And when I was in Lincoln Street as a young kid, 14, 15, there was Buffalo Motorcycle Club on Transit Road near Walden. And I used to go down there and see the bikes when they had a run and all that stuff in the summertime. In the wintertime, they had meetings there once a month. So I came in there sometimes, and the guy says, would you like to shovel the sidewalks? They had an old oil-fired heater in there. Go in there and warm the building up so when we get here, we don't have to freeze to death until the building gets warm. So they put me on as some kind of a assistant member because you had to be 18. And so I'd go in there, shovel those sidewalks, go and start the heater up. And they had a pool table there and some other stuff, and they have their meetings there. So when I got old enough to get my first bike, and that was 1954, 55, I bought that bike from Harley Davidson. They were on, I don't remember if Jefferson Avenue or not, but talked my mother into letting me buy it. And my dad was absolutely against it. So my dad had a motorcycle when he was a young guy. And so I got the thing home. My dad worked at Ford. We took it apart and painted it because he worked in the paint department. And for some reason, I painted it black and orange, which are Harley's colors. I never knew that. So when I got back, I sold a bike, and I went over to Larry Bruce, and I thanked him because they sent me a check for $400 for taking care of the place when they sold it and all that stuff. They divided the money amongst the active members, and they voted to give me $400. So I went over and thanked them for it. And he said, I got this 57 Triumph here. It's we use it for taking people out for test drives and stuff. Why don't you buy that? It's the last motorcycle I got. The guy was going to buy it, backed out. He says, mine was hand shift, completely different style bike. This had a foot shift on the right side, the brake on the left side. And he says, I've never driven a foot shift motorcycle before. Well, take it out for a test drive. And I says, Larry, I don't want it. He says, come on, I'll take you for a ride. So we went down the street, and it was a pretty fast little bike for two people. So he came back, and he says, take it here. I'll just show you, shift by bike. So he showed me how to shift and make sure in the clutch. I took it down the road a couple of times, came back, and he says, how much you want for it? He says, I got $750 in it. If you want it, you can have for what I got for it. I said, okay, you give me $400. When I was overseas, you sent me a check for $400. I'll dig up the extra money, and I'll buy it. So then my leave was expiring, so I made saddlebags for the thing, put what I could on there, and I headed out for Eglin Air Force Base, Florida, which is between Pensacola and Panama City. So I drove that down to Florida.
How long did that take?
3 days. Because the first day I hit rain in somewhere near Gettysburg. Excuse me. And it poured. I mean, the streets were like a river. So I had to stop. And I says, the guy in the hotel, you're not going to find anything. There was a convention in town. Every hotel is packed. And I says, well, I can't drive in this kind of stuff. And he says, well, I got a swing on the porch. Why don't you take that and stay there? So I stayed there. Got up the next morning, drove in Eglin Air Force Base. Eglin Air Force Base is 9 Air Force bases in one location. Jimmy Doolittle used Field 3 to train for his raid on Japan. And we had all these other bases. Field 9 was Hurlburt Field, and they tested rockets and stuff and missiles. So Eglin Air Force Base was huge, and that I love too. I got to know people down there that lived in Pensacola and stuff. And Fiesta Five Flags was a big thing in Pensacola, Florida. So I got to know this family pretty well. That Henry Brosenham and his father owned a big insurance company, auto insurance, home insurance, and all in Pensacola. So I got to know him and his family pretty good. So that was nice. I enjoyed that. Myself and another guy would ride down at Daytona Beach for the motorcycle races down there. And we went up to Montgomery, Alabama to visit another fellow up there. So that was pretty good. We had a good time.
Nice. So what'd you do when you got out of the service?
I didn't know what to do. I figured, well, I'll go to college and get something, but I didn't know what I want to do. So first job I got was auto parts delivery for an auto parts store in Buffalo. And then I decided, I should go to college, but I don't know what to do. I don't know what kind of degree or whatever I'm going after. So I bumped around, and I went to machine shops, got a job as machinist in inspection department, and kept on going. So in 1965, I met my wife Dottie at a roller rink over Airdrome, it was called, on Genesee Street, just down from where, I can't remember, it's there's a small place on the side, AJ's Tree Services there, and almost across the street was this place called the Airdrome roller rink. And in the summer they would open all the windows. They had like boarded up, and they'd open them up to vent the place out and stuff. So I met her there, and 65 we got married and had the kids and stuff. But I bumped around and went to machine shops. I worked at Scott Aviation. I worked at Manhasset Tool and Die, Riley Gear in North Tonawanda, and finally wound up over at Strip at Houday, and I worked in the machine shop there. And then I started doing gun sales and gun repair as a hobby. and I liked it enough. I says, I don't want to work for somebody else. I'd rather make less money, but I want to. My dad worked in a paint shop in Ford Motor Company. He hated the smell of paint, but he made good money, and he got to be a superintendent there. And I always remember him coming home. If he smelled paint, my mother would paint something, he'd go nuts. He just hated the smell of paint. And I says, all those years he hated what he did, but he made good money. I'd rather like what I do and not make money, so that when I get to the point where I can say, my life is pretty well lived and I'm going to retire, and I've enjoyed working. I haven't hated going to work all the time. Mm-hmm. So the difference is make money and hate your job, or like your job and not make a lot of money. And I chose to run open a gun shop. So I worked at Strippin. And in 1974, the building that's still Freeman Sport Shop here, 38 Main Street, the guy upstairs was renting it to some people downstairs, and it was a Western Auto store. Clyde Lee owned it before the war and stuff, and it used to be Ren & Seisner's hardware store at one time, and then it was a bank at one time. So he had it for rent, and I said, I think I can do it. I think I can make a living at this. So I left Strippin and opened that place up as Freeman Sport Shop. And at that time, I didn't know if I wanted to stay in the guns specifically. So I had hockey sticks and fishing gear and everything else. But eventually, the firearms took over, and repairing guns took over. And I had a pretty decent business for 40-some-odd years.
My goodness.
Yeah, at that place. And then I decided I wanted to sell it. I says, I've done enough. And the laws at that time started just getting tighter and tighter on gun control. Mm-hmm. And they made it less and less fun to buy and sell firearms. And I had a pretty good trade. Guys would come in here from Silver Creek, from Eden, from Batavia, and I had a pretty good clientele, good people that I worked with and repaired their guns and stuff, and became friends. And we used to have 4 guys come in from Buffalo. They were all World War II vets. One was a retired police guy, the other, different thing. Eventually they passed away, and now I still have chairs in the place. I don't own the business, but I still have some inventory in there. So I take stuff out of my personal collection that I got too much of this stuff, antiques and stuff, Civil War guns and that. I'll take them down there and put them in there, and we'll sell them out of the store, and then I take and pay the guy that runs it now. I'll give him a commission on it and take that money and put it away for whatever. Mm-hmm. But 40 years I was in there. I sold it in 2004. And Mike, I told him, I said, here's the deal. You're going to buy the name. You don't have to buy the inventory. As we sell the inventory, I'll give you 10%, and then I keep the rest. And that's worked out. That's worked pretty good. He's been in there since 2004. And it's enabled me to get rid of my inventory that I had laying around, just sell it and get rid of it, take it to gun shows or flea market sales or whatever.
That's really interesting. So now you're a judge, a local judge. How in the world did you get into that?
Through the gun shop.
Really?
Yeah. In this building.
The community center.
Yeah. This was the courthouse. I had a guy buy a shotgun from me. Probably got to be almost 40 years ago. He and his son apparently robbed a bank. I didn't know any of this. The problem is his check bounced. So he wrote a check. It was $200 or something. He wrote a check to me. The check bounced. So I got a hold of him, and he says, hey, your check bounced. Oh, I'll take care of it. Never saw him, this and that. So I came over here, and I filed a small claims. He says, the guy owes me money, give me a bum check. I want to, go after him in small claims court. I should have gone after him for issuing a bad check, but I didn't know any difference at that time. So we came in here, and I remember the bailiff, the judges and stuff, and I'd come in and sit down. Everybody was almost gone, and I'd say, hey, I says, I'm supposed to be here with this case. Oh, the guy called and postponed, adjourned it. He says, I sat here for 3 hours. Why didn't somebody tell me when I first walked in the door? That happened like 3 or 4 times, 3 or 4 months. The same thing. Kept on going. So I says, this is ridiculous. So I was in Mary's Good and Plenty at that time, talking to a friend of mine, and somebody behind me says, excuse me, I heard you talking about this. And I says, yeah. I says, go over there, and I says, I don't know. But I sit there almost all night long, and then finally somebody will come, what are you here for? And I told him, and he said, oh, that case has been adjourned again. Then I found out that the case wasn't adjourned so much, and that's what they knew, but apparently he and his son robbed a bank in Texas, got stopped and arrested. So he's in jail down in Texas, so I'm never going to get anything up here. And I says, I don't know if they knew that or not, but I says, they kept on adjourning. And I said, the least they could have said when I walked in the door, oh, that case has been adjourned, so I wouldn't have sat there all the time. So I talked to this person, and they said, well, the judge that's there now, he got handed the job because the judge that was in there retired, and they just gave it to this person. And he's the right political party, and nobody's ever run against him. It'd be tough to run against him because he's a local guy, well-known. But there's a lot of people that are dissatisfied, but nobody run against him because he's the party that's sort of the dominant party in this community, so you'd have a hard time beating him. I says, well, what do I got to do? Well, if you're interested, we'll have a meeting and talk to you about it. And I said, okay. So I went down and talked to him, and he says, it'd be a lot of work. You'd have to really work at it. And I says, well, if that's the way the court's being run, it's time for a change. So I ran against a person, and I won the election in 1985. And so I've been on the bench ever since.
My goodness, that's a long time.
Yeah.
Do you have any memories of a particular case that...
I can't tell you.
You can't say?
Yeah, there's a couple of cases that were really... One really bothers me today. The other... Well, they both sort of bother me, but... It involves stuff that I thought was done wrong, and in the prosecution end of it.
I see. And
some consequences happened out of it that I felt real bad about, but I had no control over it.
Yeah.
Other than that, I've always looked at court, and I think that's why I get along with so many people. I'll be in a store, Walmart, Kmart, wherever I am, Pixley's, and hey, Dennis, or Judge. I say, oh, cripe, somebody's after my ass. And they'll come over and say, if you wouldn't have done what you did for me, I'd have probably been dead by now. They were in the drugs and stuff. And he says, you helped me out as a young person, and I've been married now for 5 years. I got 2 kids, got a good job. But if it wasn't for you, I probably wouldn't have I've been dead. And that's what gives you the satisfaction of doing this job. Now, it's not happening a lot of times, but it happens often enough that it makes you feel like you've done something worthwhile. Mm-hmm. You've helped somebody. There are some people you can't help. They're just going to get into trouble, and that's the way it is. And people say, don't you feel bad locking somebody up? And I says, no. I says, they know the law. They broke the law knowingly and understanding what the consequence could be. So I says, I'm nothing more than the person that works on putting them in a location where they're going to stay for a portion of time. So I says, I didn't do that. They did that. I'm just the person that makes all the work and what's the wheels in motion and stuff. So, and I've married, oh gosh, I can't remember. It's hundreds of people I've done weddings for.
Best part of the job, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you've done this since 1985. What changes have you seen over that time for good and bad?
Tremendous amount of changes. I look at today and I say, the guy that's got to walk into these shoes, take my job when I finally retire, they have no idea of the stuff that's going on. Years ago when I first came in, it was speeding tickets, dogs, and parking tickets. Sort of. Small claims here and there. Now, we're working on a thing now that you are acting family court judge when the family court is not in session, which means Saturday and Sunday and holidays. So if you have a child that you normally don't take care of or do anything in your court, you may have him in your court and act as a family court judge until that family court judge can sit, which is maybe on a Monday or a Tuesday, or depends on a holiday. Never thought that we'd get into that. That's family court. But now we're acting family court judges. Now the other thing is, several years ago, there was a case in New York City, town area or village area, where an individual was put bail on him. So the judge put, I don't know how much bail on him, but the guy couldn't make bail. So they went to the appellate court on an appeal, and the appellate court said that under the Constitution, that individual has a right to an attorney, not only at the proceedings after he's been in a court, but at every and each proceeding, which includes the arraignment. Okay? So now, you say, okay, I got to have an attorney here. Where am I going to get an attorney at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning? And he says, well, what we're doing is we're going to have a trial of 5 counties in the state, and they're going to do this. They're going to have assigned counsel judges or assigned counsel attorneys that are going to be, each one takes a week during the month. They will have a cell phone. After hours, anything after like 11 o'clock at night, you call that number, and you got to wait for that attorney, whoever he is, to come to your court, and then you do the arraignment with an attorney representing the defendant. And he says, well, what if the guy lives in Hamburg and it's wintertime? It's going to take him 2 hours to get here. Unfortunately, that's the way the system's going to have to work. So now last week I've had 3 arraignments from other jurisdictions. You arraign for other jurisdictions as long as they contact or their boundaries are up to yours. So Alden and Clarence are next to me. So if they get an Alden arraignment, can't get an Alden judge, they call me. Then I got to go out and arraign them, set them down for the. But now we have to wait for an assigned counsel attorney to come in. I get arraignments out of Clarence. Then I get arraignments out of Buffalo. And I said, Buffalo State Police, yeah, can you do an arraignment on a felony? See, now a felony can be arraigned any village or town in the county. Doesn't have to be where it happened or adjoining. So they'll call me and say, we got a felony here. And I says, well, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. Where are you now? Well, we're down in Buffalo. It's going to be an hour to get here and set up. Okay. So, yeah, I'll do the arraignment. So they come in from state police in Buffalo on the thruway, bring the guy in, do an arraignment, put bail on him. But now, if that happens, you have to have an assigned counsel attorney. So you got to make sure that you contact that phone number. And if the guy is not available, or like the other day, I got a hold of counsel. He was, this so-and-so attorney on duty. He's in Crystal Beach. Now this is 12:30 at night. I says, gosh, by the time you get dressed, get down to the border and get here, it's going to be 2 hours. So we'll be here till 2 o'clock, 2:30 in the morning waiting for assigned counsel. Fortunately, the individual had a felony warrant out of North Tonawanda. So I figured, well, I'll get a hold of the attorney, talk to him. He says, here, talk to your client. So he talked to him. And he says, can you put low bail on him? He says, he can't make any kind of bail. I says, but if I OR him, release him on recognizance, I'm out from underneath this problem. But they got to take him to North Tonawanda because of an outstanding warrant. But that doesn't happen a lot. So now it's become a problem. The only other suggestion they had was that we have one local court that several courts will go to. That courthouse will be available for arraignments within, like, say, Clarence, Newstead, Akron, Alden, Depew, and they'll have a local jurisdiction to all those courts. And then you go to that court. For a week, you'll be assigned as the arraigning judge for any of those towns and villages. And then you send the information to each one. You have an attorney that'll be there. They'll be assigned to that court, so you won't have to search for an attorney. There'll be one there. So that's the next possibility of this thing with the cell phones doesn't work out.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's back out here, and let me ask you the most difficult question of all. So imagine this: a generation from now, your grandchildren are talking to their children, remembering you. What would you hope they would tell their children about you?
Then I treated people the way I'd want to be treated in the court or out of the court, that I respected people regardless of their ethnic backgrounds. I was a pretty decent guy, you know. I think that's the most of us can ask for when they finally hand over the working tools of this life. Yeah, I am amazed at the people that I do see. Judge, you married us 20 years ago. Or I recognize the name. Is your dad so-and-so? Yeah, I used to have him in court 30 years ago. Now I got the son in court. So you see that once in a while, but fortunately not that much. But yeah, just to be known that you did a good job, honest and fair, and give you a break. And I think everybody deserves a second chance. You know, you don't throw the book at somebody for doing something stupid. We all do something stupid. And I think there's a lot of times when people got put in jail or something happened in their life that they did the wrong thing, they knew it, and you work on it to help them straighten themselves out. And if it does work, fine. If it doesn't work, at least you tried.
All right. Well, on that note, Dennis, thank you so much for joining us today.
There's so many things I could talk about.
I know. We could go on forever.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening in, and remember to tune in to the next episode of Remembering Akron.